He swore the child wasn't his. He'd said it with a coldness that shattered Clara's world, his voice like a slammed door in the dead of winter. A lonely girl looking for someone to blame. That's what he'd called her. And then he'd vanished, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of his denial and the secret stirring inside her. But now, as the train hissed to a stop, the lie was about to crumble. The wind whipped across the platform, carrying the scent of coal smoke and the faint, weak cries of the baby bundled in her arms. She held him tighter, her own body a shield against the man standing there, still and silent, like a ghost from a life she'd fought to bury. It was Eli Ward. He looked older, carved leaner by the years and the solitude. The hat pulled low over his brow couldn't hide the hard set of his jaw, or the way his eyes, those same stormy gray eyes, widened in shock. He hadn't expected her. She hadn't written, hadn't sent a word. She had simply boarded the first train heading west, fueled by desperation and a mother's fierce, protective love. The baby whimpered again, a small, fragile sound that cut through the station's silence like a blade. Eli's gaze dropped from her face to the bundle in her arms. His breath hitched. The entire world seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting. The platform, the train, the vast empty sky, it all went still. "Clara," he said, his voice flat, a stone skipping across a frozen lake. "Eli," she answered, her voice trembling just enough to betray the fear that gripped her heart. She took a step forward, then another. She hadn't come for revenge. She hadn't come to beg. She had come because the child in her arms was sick, his breaths growing shallower each day, and he deserved to look upon his father's face at least once, even if that face was a mask of stone. "You came back," he stated, his voice hollow. "I had to," she whispered, her throat tight. His eyes were locked on the bundle. He didn't ask the question. He didn't have to. The truth was written all over that tiny, pale face, in the curve of his brow, the shape of his nose, and in his eyes. He had his father's eyes. She pulled back the blanket, letting the cool morning air touch the baby's cheek. She watched Eli's face, searching for a flicker of recognition, of remorse, of anything other than that cold, guarded emptiness. For a second, something cracked. A fissure in the granite. His jaw clenched, his shoulders tensed, as if taking a physical blow. But he didn't reach for the baby. He didn't step closer. He took a step back. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you've done." Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't the reaction she had braced herself for. This wasn't rejection. This was fear. Raw, primal fear. What had he meant? What had she done by bringing his son here? The man before her wasn't just a former lover turning his back on his responsibility. He was a man terrified of the child himself. He stared at the baby, not with denial, but with a horrifying, gut-wrenching dread, as if he wasn't looking at a son, but at a death sentence. "Get back on that train, Clara," he said, his voice urgent, pleading. "Take him and go. Go now, before it's too late." But the train was already pulling away, its lonely whistle echoing down the tracks, leaving them stranded on the platform in a silence more terrifying than any argument. Stranded with a truth that was far more complicated and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Eli let out a shuddering breath, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. He looked around the empty platform, his eyes darting into the shadows as if expecting someone to step out. "It's too late," he muttered to himself. He turned to her, his face pale, his eyes haunted. "There's nothing for it now. You'll have to come with me." He didn't offer to carry her trunk. He didn't offer to hold the baby. He just turned and walked, expecting her to follow. Clara hesitated for only a moment, clutching her son, Jamie, tighter. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to find another way, but where could she go? Jamie's cough was getting worse, and she had spent her last dollar on the train ticket. She followed him. They walked away from the small, dusty town, away from the curious glances of the few people milling about. They walked toward the jagged hills, where the trees grew thick and the shadows lay long and deep. The path to his cabin wasn't a well-worn road. It was a barely there trail, as if he didn't want to be found. The cabin itself was a shock. It wasn't just a lonely shack built for one. It was a fortress. It stood in a narrow clearing, backed against a sheer rock face, giving it only one direction of approach. The windows were small, almost like slits in the thick log walls, and the door was made of heavy, reinforced wood with a thick iron bar leaning against it from the inside. This wasn't a home. It was a hideout. "Stay inside and keep the boy quiet," Eli said, his voice devoid of all warmth as he held the door open for her. She stepped into the dim, cool interior. It was sparse, even more so than she'd imagined. A cot, a table, a single chair, a cold stove. But there was something else. Propped against the wall, right next to the door, was a rifle. It wasn't a hunting rifle for show. It was clean, oiled, and ready. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Who was he hiding from? "Eli, what is this?" she demanded, her voice a shaky whisper. "Why are you living like this? What are you so afraid of?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. He busied himself with her trunk, setting it down with a thud. "You ask too many questions." Just then, Jamie let out a weak, rattling cough. It was a sound that had been her constant companion for weeks, a sound of dread. Eli froze. He turned slowly, his eyes wide with that same terror she'd seen on the platform. He stared at Jamie, who was now whimpering in her arms, his tiny face flushed with fever. "That cough," Eli said, his voice barely audible. "How long has he had it?" "A few weeks," she answered, confused. "The doctor in the city said it was just a chest cold, that it would pass." Eli shook his head slowly, a dark, terrible certainty in his eyes. He finally looked at her, and the truth he offered was 1,000 times worse than the rejection she had feared. "It won't pass," he said, his voice hollowed out by a grief she couldn't comprehend. "It's not a cold, Clara. It's the lung sickness." He said the words lung sickness like a curse. "It's in the blood," he continued, his gaze distant, lost in a painful memory. "My blood. It took my brothers. It took my sister. I ran from it. I left everything behind so it couldn't follow me." Clara stared at him, horrified, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He hadn't denied Jamie out of cruelty or selfishness. He had denied him out of a desperate, hopeless attempt to save him. He had run from her, from them, because he believed his very blood carried a death sentence. And by bringing Jamie here, she hadn't just brought him to his father. She had brought him to the place where his family's curse was born. The sickness wasn't just a sickness. It was a legacy. "There's no doctor who can fix this," Eli said, his voice flat with despair. He walked over to the small, grimy window and stared out, his back to her. "I thought if I stayed away, if I never had a child, I could let it die with me." Clara sank onto the edge of the cot, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She looked down at Jamie, at his small, struggling breaths, and a wave of nausea washed over her. All this time, she had thought Eli was the monster. But the monster was something invisible, something hiding in the very fabric of their son. "Why didn't you tell me?" she choked out, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "When I told you I was pregnant, why didn't you tell me this?" "Would you have believed me?" he shot back, turning to face her, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears of anger and grief. "Or would you have thought it was just another excuse, another way for a coward to run? It was easier to let you hate me, easier than telling you I might have given our son a death sentence." The raw honesty in his voice silenced her. He was right. She wouldn't have believed him. Jamie coughed again, a harsh, dry sound that echoed in the tense silence of the cabin. Eli flinched as if he'd been struck. "There's an old woman in the hills," he said suddenly, his tone shifting, becoming urgent. "She has herbs, remedies. It might not do anything. It never did for my siblings, but it's better than nothing." He grabbed a leather pouch from a hook on the wall and started towards the door. "Wait," Clara said, standing up. "You can't go to town?" "No," he said sharply. "Never town. Too many people who know the ward name. Too many who remember the sickness. They'll look at him with pity and then fear. They'll cast us out. The old woman is our only chance." He paused at the door, his hand on the heavy iron bar. He looked back at her, his face a mask of grim determination. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. No one." His warning was so severe, so absolute, that a new fear began to creep in, overshadowing the terror of the sickness. It wasn't just the townspeople he was hiding from. The rifle by the door, the fortified cabin, the isolated location. It was for more than just keeping judgmental eyes away. He was hiding from something else, something worse. She watched him disappear into the woods, his figure swallowed by the shadows. She slid the heavy bar across the door, the sound echoing like a tomb sealing shut. She was alone, trapped in a madman's fortress with her sick child, praying for a cure that her son's own father believed didn't exist. As the hours stretched on, the silence in the cabin became a living thing. It pressed in on her, amplifying every one of Jamie's labored breaths, every creak of the floorboards. Clara rocked him, humming lullabies that sounded thin and desperate in the oppressive quiet. She looked around the room, really looked this time. The place was a testament to a man living in perpetual fear. There were no personal effects, no pictures, nothing to suggest a life beyond mere survival. It was the home of a man who expected to have to leave at a moment's notice. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked. Outside the door, Clara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Her eyes darted to the door, to the heavy bar she had slid into place. Eli had said not to open it for anyone. Anyone. A soft knock came, gentle, almost hesitant. It wasn't Eli. He would have a signal, or he would have been louder, more confident. This was someone trying to be quiet. "Clara?" A man's voice called, muffled by the thick wood. "Clara, are you in there? It's Matthew Dane." Clara's breath caught. Matthew Dane, the man who had courted her before Eli, the man from a wealthy family in town. The man she had told about her pregnancy, hoping for help, only to be met with scorn and disbelief. He had called her a liar, same as Eli, but with a smug cruelty Eli had never possessed. What was he doing here? How did he even know where to find this cabin? "Clara, I know you're in there," he called again, his voice growing more insistent. "The whole town is talking. They saw Eli Ward march you out of town. I just want to make sure you're all right." She didn't answer. She held Jamie tighter, praying he wouldn't make a sound. Eli's warning echoed in her head. "Don't open it for anyone." "Listen, Clara." Matthew's voice dropped, becoming conspiratorial. "You don't know the man you're with. He's not just some heartbroken recluse. He's dangerous. His whole family is." A chill ran down Clara's spine. "The Wards are cursed, Clara," Matthew continued, his voice slick and persuasive. "Not just with sickness. There's a darkness in that bloodline. Eli's father, Silas Ward, he's not a man you ever want to cross. Eli ran from him, not just from the sickness. He stole something from his father before he left." Stole something? Clara's mind reeled. This was getting more tangled, more terrifying with every passing second. "Eli's not who you think he is," Matthew pressed. "Let me help you. I can take you and the boy away from here, far away. Just open the door." Her hand trembled as she considered it. Could he be telling the truth? Was Eli not just a man haunted by grief, but a thief on the run from a powerful, dangerous father? Was this cabin a shield not just against a curse, but against a man's wrath? Jamie let out a soft whimper. Outside, Matthew went silent. He had heard. "He's in there with you, isn't he?" Matthew's voice changed, losing its sympathetic tone, replaced by a cold, calculating edge. "The child. So the rumors are true." Another voice sounded from outside, a deeper, harsher voice. "Is the boy in there, Dane?" "He is," Matthew replied. Clara scrambled away from the door, her back hitting the far wall. There were two of them. She wasn't talking to Matthew Dane, concerned citizen. She was talking to a scout. The heavy thud of a boot kicking the door reverberated through the cabin. Then another. They were trying to break it down. Clara frantically looked around the room. The rifle. Her eyes landed on the rifle propped against the wall. She had never fired a gun in her life, but Eli's words, his absolute terror, gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She scrambled over, her hands shaking as she lifted the heavy weapon. It felt alien in her arms, cold and deadly. Another slam against the door, and this time the wood splintered near the bar. It wouldn't hold for long. She was trapped. Trapped with her dying son, with unknown men trying to break in, and the man who was supposed to protect them was miles away in the hills, searching for a cure that might not even exist. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air from the woods behind the cabin. It was high-pitched, piercing. The pounding on the door stopped instantly. Clara heard muffled curses from outside, the sound of boots scrambling away from the door. A moment later, she heard the thunder of horses riding away at a gallop. They were gone. She stood in the center of the room, shaking, the heavy rifle still in her hands. The whistle. It had to be Eli, a signal. He had been close by. He had been watching. Minutes later, she heard his quiet, distinct knock on the door, 3 short taps. "Clara? It's me." Her knees almost buckled with relief. She stumbled to the door, fumbling with the heavy bar, and pulled it open. Eli stood there, breathless, his knuckles white around the leather pouch in his hand. His eyes immediately scanned the cabin, checking on her, on Jamie, before they landed on the splintered door. His face darkened into a thunderous mask of fury. "Who was it?" he growled. "Matthew Dane," she said, her voice trembling. "And another man. They said your father is looking for you. They said you stole something from him." Eli's face went white. The fear was back, 10 times stronger than before. It was a stark, visceral terror that made the blood drain from his face. He stared at her, then at Jamie, and she finally understood. "It wasn't something, was it?" she whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on her. "It was someone. You didn't just run from the sickness, Eli. You saved someone from your father." Eli nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a terrible sadness. "My younger sister, Alara. She was sick, like the others. My father. He doesn't see it as an illness. He sees it as a weakness, a stain on the family name. He was going to let her die, lock her in her room, just like the others. I couldn't let him. I got her out. I sent her east with all the money I had to a special clinic. I told her to change her name, to never look back." He sank into the chair, the story pouring out of him in a torrent of long-held pain. "I stayed behind. I made a trail for him to follow, leading him away from her. This cabin, this life, it's all been a decoy, to keep him chasing me, so she could be free." Clara stared at him, her perception of him shifting once again. The coward, the recluse, the man haunted by a curse. It had all been a lie, a carefully constructed role to protect his sister. He wasn't a coward at all. He was a hero. "He must have found out she's gone," Eli murmured, his voice grim. "He must know I tricked him. And now Matthew Dane has told him about Jamie. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow with a fresh wave of despair. "He's not coming for me anymore, Clara," he said, his voice cracking. "He's coming for my son. He sees the sickness in Jamie not as a tragedy, but as a second chance to cleanse the family line, to do what he thinks is right." The cabin, which had felt like a fortress just moments before, now felt like a trap. The splintered door was a stark reminder of how fragile their defenses were. They weren't just fighting a sickness anymore. They were being hunted, and their enemy was the baby's own grandfather. Eli opened the leather pouch he'd risked so much for. Inside wasn't just a bundle of dried herbs. Tucked into a fold of worn leather was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He held it out to Jamie, whose small fingers wrapped around it instinctively. "The old woman gave me this," Eli said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said it was for protection. I thought she meant from the sickness." He looked at the splintered door, then back at his son. "I was wrong. It was for protection from him." He stood up, his posture changing. The despair was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The man who had spent years hiding was done running. "He thinks Jamie is a weakness," Eli said, his voice low and guttural. "He thinks my son is a stain to be removed. But he's wrong." He walked over and picked up the rifle Clara had dropped. He checked the chamber, his movements sure and steady. "Jamie is not a weakness," he declared, his stormy gray eyes meeting hers, filled with a fire she had never seen before. "He is a ward, and his father is going to protect him." The air in the cabin crackled with a new, terrifying energy. The game had changed. The hunter was coming, but for the first time, the prey was ready to fight back. Eli was no longer the ghost of a man she'd met on the platform. He was a father. He was a protector. And he was about to go to war with his own blood. The following days were a blur of tense preparation. The sun would rise, casting long, ominous shadows through the trees, and the first thing Eli would do was check the perimeter of the cabin. He moved with a quiet, deadly efficiency that spoke of years spent looking over his shoulder. He wasn't just a farmer or a recluse. He was a soldier in a war no one else knew he was fighting. He reinforced the door with a new, thicker plank of wood. He boarded up the back window completely, leaving only the small slits at the front to see through. The cabin became darker, more claustrophobic, a bunker against the coming storm. He tried the old woman's herbs, brewing a pungent tea that he patiently helped Jamie sip. The baby's cough didn't vanish, but it seemed to loosen its grip, his breaths coming just a little easier. It was a small victory, a fragile flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. One afternoon, while Clara was rocking a sleeping Jamie, Eli pressed the rifle into her hands. "You need to know how this works," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. His hands guided hers, showing her how to hold it, how to load the cartridges, how to sight down the long barrel. His touch was firm, impersonal, the touch of a commander instructing a soldier. "My father, Silas," he said, his voice low as he stared out the narrow window. "He doesn't travel with an army. He doesn't like witnesses. It will be him, and maybe one other man. Dane, most likely. He likes to use people who are greedy and have no loyalty." "What will he do?" Clara whispered, the cold weight of the rifle a terrifying reality in her arms. "He won't knock," Eli answered grimly. "He'll wait until he thinks we're sleeping, or he'll try to smoke us out. He's patient. He'll watch for days if he has to, looking for a mistake." He turned to her, his eyes boring into hers. "We can't make any." That night, as an unnerving silence settled over the valley, Eli pulled a loose floorboard from beneath his cot. He reached into the dark space and pulled out a small, locked metal box. He opened it with a key he wore on a leather cord around his neck. Inside wasn't money or valuables. It was a stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. "I told you I sent my sister Alara away," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it in a long time. These are from her. For the first year, she wrote every week, telling me about the clinic, about how her breathing was getting better, about the man she met there. He untied the ribbon and handed her the top letter. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. "Dearest brother," it began, "the doctors here are wonderful. They don't call it a curse. They call it asthma. They have medicines, inhalers, things that help. Father was wrong, Eli. He was wrong about everything. We weren't weak. We were just sick. And he let us die." Clara looked up, her heart aching for the family torn apart by one man's cruel pride. "She got married," Eli continued, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "To a good man. They have a daughter. She's healthy. She's happy. Ilara is free of him." His smile faded. "But she was worried about me. She knew I was the bait in the trap. The last letter I got was 6 months ago." He handed her the final, worn letter. "Eli, I'm scared," it read. "Matthew Dane was seen in the town near my home. He was asking questions. About you. About me. I think Father knows you tricked him. I think he knows I'm alive and well. Which means he knows his curse is a lie. This isn't about weakness anymore, brother. It's about pride. He can't let the world know he was wrong. He will hunt you down to silence you. Please, run. Take the money I've saved and disappear. Don't let him do to you what he did to the others." A cold dread settled in Clara's stomach. Silas Ward wasn't just coming for the baby. He was coming to erase the evidence of his own monstrous lie. Eli and Jamie were the last two people who knew the truth, that Silas Ward had let his own children perish from a treatable illness to protect his twisted sense of honor. "So Matthew Dane wasn't just a scout," Clara breathed. "He was hunting for your sister. And when he couldn't find her, he came back here," Eli finished, his jaw tight, "and found me, with a son with the same cough." Suddenly Eli froze. He held up a hand for silence, his head cocked, listening. Clara strained her ears, hearing nothing but the wind sighing through the pines. But Eli had heard something else. Years of living on the edge had honed his senses to a razor's edge. He moved silently to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. He waited. Then it came. A sound so faint she almost missed it. The soft snap of a twig from the trees at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't an animal. It was a man, trying to be silent, and failing. They were here. Eli's face was a mask of stone. He looked at Clara, then at Jamie sleeping peacefully in the cradle, oblivious to the mortal danger that surrounded them. In that one look, she saw all the years of pain, of running, of sacrifice. It all came down to this one night. He gave her a sharp, curt nod towards the darkest corner of the cabin. The message was clear: stay there, stay quiet, and protect the boy. He moved to the narrow slit of a window, the rifle held at his side, and waited. The hunter had become the hunted, but now the hunted was waiting in ambush. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. It was filled with the unspoken terror of what was about to happen. The cabin was no longer a home or a hideout. It was a tomb, waiting for its occupant. The moon climbed higher, casting a pale, ghostly light over the clearing. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. Every rustle of leaves, every hoot of a distant owl, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through Clara's veins. She crouched in the corner, one hand on Jamie's cradle, the other clutching a heavy iron skillet, the only weapon she had. Eli hadn't moved. He was a statue of vengeance, perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the moonlit patch of ground in front of the cabin. Then, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. It was a tall man, broad-shouldered, moving with an unnerving confidence. He wore a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, surveying the cabin like a wolf studying a sheep pen. This had to be him, Silas Ward. Another shadow emerged, shorter, wirier, Matthew Dane. He pointed towards the cabin door, then said something to the taller man, who just nodded slowly. They began to advance across the clearing, their boots making no sound on the soft pine needles. They moved like predators, assured of their victory. Clara held her breath, her knuckles white around the handle of the skillet. Eli remained motionless. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Silas and Matthew reached the porch. Instead of trying the door, Silas gestured to the side of the cabin. Matthew nodded and produced a flask from his coat. He began to splash a liquid, oil, Clara realized with a surge of terror, along the dry log walls. They were going to burn them out. Just as Matthew was about to produce a match, Eli moved. It wasn't a sudden, jerky motion. It was a fluid, economical shift. The rifle came up, the stock settling against his shoulder, his eye aligning with the sight. "That's far enough," Eli's voice boomed through the night, clear and steady. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. Silas and Matthew froze. They spun around, searching for the source of the voice. "Show yourself, boy," Silas snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pure menace. "Hiding in the dark like a coward, just like your mother." "I'm not hiding," Eli called back, his voice echoing eerily from the dark interior of the cabin. "I'm waiting, and you're not welcome on my land." Silas let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your land? This land is mine. Everything in this valley is mine, including the weak-blooded filth you're hiding in there." He took a step closer, his hand dropping to the pistol holstered at his hip. "I've come for the boy, Eli. I will not have another generation of the ward name shamed by sickness. Give him to me. I'll make it quick. A mercy." "You don't know the meaning of the word," Eli shot back. "I gave you mercy when I let you run," Silas said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "A mistake I'm here to correct. Now, for the last time, give me the boy." "You'll have to come and get him," Eli said. And that was the signal. In the split second that Silas's hand tightened on his pistol, Eli fired. The shot wasn't aimed at his father. It exploded into the dirt right at Silas's feet, sending up a shower of rock and soil. It was a warning shot, the last one he would give. Matthew Dane yelped and scrambled back, fumbling for his own gun. "Fool!" Silas roared, drawing his pistol and firing blindly at the dark slit of the window. The bullet splintered the wood just inches from where Eli's head had been. Eli had already moved, a phantom in the dark. Another shot rang out from a different window, this one catching Matthew Dane in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his pistol, staggering back into the trees. Silas was a different breed. He didn't flinch. He fired again, a cold, methodical rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. The bullets thudded into the thick log walls of the cabin. He was a man possessed by a singular, dark purpose. "You can't hide forever, boy," he bellowed. "Your son's coughing will give you away." And as if on cue, woken by the gunfire, Jamie began to cry. A thin, terrified wail that cut through the night. A terrible, triumphant smile spread across Silas's face in the moonlight. He knew where they were. He stalked towards the corner of the cabin where Clara was huddled with their son. "I hear him," Silas crooned, his voice dripping with venom. "The little whelp is singing for me." Eli knew he couldn't stay inside. Silas would get to them. He had to draw him away. "Clara!" he yelled. "Bar the door! Don't open it until I come back!" Before she could protest, Eli burst out of the cabin from the back, a direction Silas wasn't expecting. He fired a shot into the air, drawing his father's attention. "Over here, old man!" Eli roared, disappearing into the dark woods. Silas spun around, his eyes wild with fury. He had been tricked again. With a snarl of frustration, he abandoned the cabin and plunged into the forest after his son, his heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The forest swallowed them both. The sound of gunfire faded into the distance, followed by an agonizing silence. Clara was alone again, the bar back across the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't know who was winning. She didn't know if Eli was alive or dead. She waited. For minutes. For an hour. The silence stretched into an eternity. Then a knock came at the door. It wasn't Eli's signal. It was a frantic, desperate pounding. "Clara! For the love of God, open the door! It's me, Matthew!" She froze. Matthew Dane, wounded but alive. "Please, Clara," he begged, his voice strained with pain. "You have to help me. He's insane. Silas, he's not just going to kill Eli, he's going to kill us all. I was wrong. I was a fool to work with him." Clara's mind raced. Was it a trick? A ploy by Silas to get her to open the door? Or was Matthew genuinely terrified, realizing he'd sided with a monster? His pleas sounded real, his terror genuine. "He's coming back, Clara!" Matthew shrieked, his voice rising in panic. "I heard the final shot. He's coming back for the boy. You have to let me in. I can help you. I have a horse. We can get away." She was torn. Her instincts screamed to keep the door barred. But what if he was right? What if Silas had won and he was on his way back to finish the job? Could she and Jamie escape on their own? Or was the wounded man outside their only chance of survival? Her eyes fell on Jamie, sleeping fitfully in his cradle. His life was in her hands. With a trembling hand, she reached for the bar. What should she do? Trust the man who had led the monster to their doorstep? Or face the monster alone? Her hand hovered over the heavy wooden bar. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was a trick. Matthew Dane had shown his true colors. He was a weasel, a man driven by greed and envy. Trusting him was suicide, but his terror sounded so real. "Please, Clara," he sobbed from the other side of the door. "He shot me for failing him. He'll kill me just for being a witness. I don't want to die." The mention of being a witness struck a chord. Silas didn't like witnesses. That's what Eli had said. Maybe Matthew had finally realized that his usefulness to Silas Ward was at an end. Against her better judgment, driven by the sliver of a chance that he might be their only way out, she lifted the bar. The heavy wood groaned in protest. She pulled the door open just a crack, peering out into the moonlit night. Matthew Dane was there, slumped against the doorframe, his left shoulder a bloody mess. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with genuine animalistic fear. But he was alone. "Quickly!" he gasped, trying to push his way inside. "Before he gets back!" But as the door swung open, Clara saw it. A flicker of movement in his eyes, a glance over her shoulder, towards the cradle. It wasn't the look of a man desperate for safety. It was the look of a man confirming his target. It was a trap. In that same instant, a huge figure stepped out from the shadows behind Matthew. Silas Ward. He was unscathed, his long coat immaculate, a smoking pistol in his hand. A cold, triumphant smirk played on his lips. Eli's final shot hadn't been for Silas. It must have been a final, desperate act. Eli was gone. "Clever girl," Silas rumbled, shoving Matthew aside. But not clever enough. Clara slammed the door shut, but it was too late. Silas's massive boot was already in the way. With a single powerful shove, the door flew open, sending Clara stumbling backward. She fell, landing hard on the floorboards, the skillet clattering away from her grasp. Silas Ward filled the doorway, a monstrous silhouette against the pale moonlight. He stepped into the cabin, his presence sucking all the air from the room. His eyes, the same stormy gray as Eli's and Jamie's, were utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. They were the eyes of a shark. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble," he said, his voice calm, which was more terrifying than any shout. "My son was weak, sentimental, a flaw I have now corrected." He gestured vaguely towards the forest. "Now, give me the boy, and I will let you walk away from here." Clara scrambled backward on the floor, positioning herself between Silas and the cradle where Jamie had begun to cry again. No, she breathed, her voice shaking but defiant. You will not touch him. Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. So much fire. Eli always did have a weakness for that. A pity it has to be extinguished. He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at her heart. This was it. The end. She closed her eyes, a silent prayer on her lips. A shot rang out. But it wasn't from Silas's gun. It came from outside. Silas grunted, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He staggered forward a step, a dark stain blossoming on the front of his pristine coat. He looked down at his chest, then back up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Clara's eyes flew open. Standing in the doorway, framed by the moonlight, was Eli. He was bruised, his shirt was torn, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. And in his hands, he held a smoking pistol. I told you, Eli said, his voice rough with exhaustion and fury, to stay away from my son. Silas stared at him, bewildered. But I shot you. I saw you fall. You shot a ghost, Eli rasped, taking a step into the cabin. He had circled back, using the forest he knew so well to outmaneuver his father, just as he had been doing for years. He had let his father think he'd won, counting on his arrogance. Rage contorted Silas's features. With a guttural roar, he raised his own pistol, ready to fire back at the son who refused to die. But before he could pull the trigger, another shot echoed through the night. This one came from behind Silas. Matthew Dane, who had been cowering on the porch, now stood with a small derringer in his shaking hand. The second shot had hit Silas in the back. Matthew's face was a mask of terror and desperate self-preservation. He had realized that siding with the winner was his only way out, and in a split second, he had switched his allegiance. Silas collapsed to his knees, his pistol clattering to the floor. He looked from his son to Matthew, his face a mixture of fury and betrayal. He tried to speak, but only a bloody gurgle came out. Then he pitched forward, landing face down on the floor of the cabin he had come to cleanse. Silence descended, heavy, profound, and absolute. Matthew Dane dropped his derringer as if it were on fire and stumbled back, his eyes wild. I helped you, he stammered, looking at Eli. You saw it. I helped you. Eli didn't even look at him. His eyes were only for Clara and Jamie. He walked slowly across the room, his legs unsteady, and knelt beside her. He gently pushed her hair back from her face, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. Are you all right? He whispered. She could only nod, tears of relief streaming down her face. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine, sweat, and gunpowder, the scent of the man who had walked through fire for them. He held her tightly for a long moment, before pulling back to look at their son. Jamie had stopped crying and was staring up at them with wide, curious eyes. Eli reached into the cradle and lifted his son into his arms, holding him with a tenderness that brought a fresh wave of tears to Clara's eyes. He held Jamie up, his small body silhouetted against the dawn that was just beginning to break, painting the sky in hues of pink and gray. The curse is broken, Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was never in the blood. It was in him, and he's gone. The long night was over. Spring arrived as if on cue, breathing life back into the valley. The sun melted the last of the fear from the shadows, and the trees seemed to stand a little taller, a little greener. In the weeks that followed, the world righted itself. The town marshal, alerted by a now cooperative Matthew Dane, came and went, officially ruling Silas Ward's death an act of self-defense. The story of the cruel patriarch and the son who fought back became a local legend, whispered with a mixture of awe and respect. The cabin, once a fortress of fear, slowly transformed into a home. Eli took down the boards from the windows, letting the sunlight stream in. The rifle was cleaned and put away, not as a weapon of war, but as a tool for hunting. The heavy bar on the door was used to patch a broken fence. With proper medicine bought from a real doctor in the next town over, and without the oppressive fear that had suffocated them, Jamie began to thrive. The lung sickness, which was indeed a severe form of asthma, became manageable. His rattling cough was replaced by gurgles of laughter. The color returned to his cheeks. He was a happy, healthy baby. One sun-drenched afternoon, Clara sat on the porch, watching Eli play with Jamie in the grass. He was holding the boy aloft, making him fly like a hawk, and Jamie's delighted shrieks echoed in the clear air. Eli looked up and caught her eye, and the smile that reached his face was one of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a smile she had waited a lifetime to see. He walked over and sat beside her on the porch steps, settling Jamie onto his lap. The boy immediately grabbed the collar of Eli's shirt, holding on tight. "I never thanked you, Clara," Eli said quietly, his gaze fixed on their son. "For what?" she asked, confused. "For not giving up on me," he said, finally looking at her. "For coming back. For showing me that a father isn't someone who runs from the darkness. He's someone who stands in the light and fights for his family." He reached out and took her hand, his palm rough and calloused against hers. "I was so scared of becoming my father that I almost lost the chance to become Jamie's." He paused, his stormy gray eyes searching hers. "I know I don't have a right to ask for anything. Not after everything I put you through. But I have to say it." His voice dropped to a raw whisper. "I love you, Clara. I think I have since the first moment I saw you. I was just too much of a coward to admit it." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their son batting at a butterfly. All the pain, all the fear, all the lonely nights, they had all led to this man, to this child, to this home. "I love you too, Eli," she whispered. The past was a ghost, but it no longer had the power to haunt them. They had faced the monster and won. They had broken the curse not with magic, but with courage. And in a small cabin at the edge of the valley, a family that had started with a lie was finally beginning its life with the truth. If you were moved by Clara and Eli's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories of survival, love, and redemption. What do you think is the true meaning of family? Let us know in the comments below.